She started her first company at the age of 19 and is currently the founder of Liminal Technologies. As a life learner, Melissa has spent over 20 years studying human behaviour, cognitive science and philosophy. Over the past 4 years, she has been researching and consulting with some of the world's leading organisations with a specific focus on how technology and human behaviour intersect. This work has led to the creation of Liminal's first-of-kind technology that can measure authentic human behaviours such as humility and empathy. Liminal is also aspiring to build technologies that can augment our intelligence in order to help us understand more about what it means to be human than we ever have before. Melissa, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
All right, thank you very much. So thank you, Sam, for your kind introduction and for having me here today. It's true, I am an entrepreneur, which is a little bit different to the audience. Now, being an entrepreneur can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I, however, think that it actually gives us something in common, because for me, being an entrepreneur is actually about being of service. So the way that I see it is that the future is relying on a small group of innovators to build the technology that will create a better future for everybody. And so it's us entrepreneurs that get this opportunity to question everything for a living. So it is in that spirit today that I would like to invite you all on a little bit of an entrepreneurial journey for the next 8.5 minutes to question everything that we think we know about how we teach emotional intelligence. Now, all good entrepreneurial journeys need to start off with a big question, like a moonshot. So the big question that I would like to pose to you today is, what is the future of human behaviour? Now, we're talking a lot about future adaptive organisations, yet we don't talk a lot about who the people are inside it. So that's the focus that I want to take today. Now, for us to go into the future, we first need to know where we are and how we got here. So I just want to take you on a quick trip back to start with. So modern behaviour science started somewhere around the 1880s with the great man theory, which probably lacked a bit of that cognitive diversity we were talking about earlier on today. Now, if you fast forward 50 years from that, you get our first incarnation of trait theory. And then shortly after that, we got behaviour theory, and then we got contingency theory. And then, sometime after that, we got transformational theory, transitional theory, and transactional theory. And then sometime around the mid-1980s, we landed on emotional intelligence theory. Now, emotional intelligence didn't actually gain widespread popularity until about 10 years after that, when David Goleman published his best-selling book by the same name, which some of you might have read, called Emotional Intelligence. Now, then something really big happened, which was the internet. Now, with the internet came this $100 billion enterprise training marketplace with thousands of schools of thought, training programs and research to match. So what we have is this abundance of research and then an abundance of people who are using it. Yet here we are, right? It's 2019 and the World Economic Forum releases their Global Economic Risk Report, and it lists employee emotional distress in their top 5 global economic risks. Now, to put that into perspective, this is the first time in the history of the report that a human behaviour managed to make the list. What's more alarming and much more closer to home is that 1 in every 9 Australians are now clinically diagnosed with a depression or anxiety disorder. So, when you think about that, it's probably safe to say that when it comes to behaviour development and emotional intelligence, there's something about the way that we're teaching it that's just not working. So maybe we need to go back to basics a little bit and ask a really simple question, which is, what exactly is it that we're trying to teach? So when you look at emotional intelligence coursework, they teach qualities like humility and empathy, or connection and self-reflection, and something we've heard a lot about today, which is moral courage. Now, what all of these qualities have in common is that they are all authentic, spontaneous human behaviour. So what we're looking for here when we're teaching it is a transformation in this kind of behaviour. Yet, as it turns out, you can't actually change a mind by trying to change a mind. Right? So the real truth is, when you get to the heart of it, that when it comes to personal behaviour transformation, it's something that can't be taught. Behaviour transformation requires that the individual makes a choice to change. So it's on that basis that the focus needs to shift a little bit from the direct acquisition of skills to the cultivation of the correct environment for these transformation events to take place. Now, when you have a look at large organisations and how they teach emotional intelligence, and you sort of ask the question, where does this training start? The first thing that you sort of see quite quickly is that in an attempt to solve the scalability problem, which all big organisations face, and it's real, they teach emotional intelligence and behaviour development in groups. Now, what happens though is it's the same coursework and the same teaching approach to all the people in the groups. Yet what we're seeking are these individual transformations. So you can kind of start to see why things might not quite be working out the way that we want them to. So if the solution lies with the individual, then we too must start with the individual. So what do we kind of know so far? What we know is that we need to kind of shift our focus a little bit to from direct skills acquisition to creating these environments where transformation events can take place. But all this talk about teaching kind of leads to another really big question, and it's one that I've heard asked maybe 4 or 5 times today already in speeches, which is how do we measure these authentic human behaviours like humility and empathy? Because ultimately we can't improve upon that which we can't measure. So until now, the only real scalable method of interpersonal behaviour has been done through survey. So that's either like a third-party survey or a self-assessment. Now, among the many issues with this method of assessment, like gaming the answers, which I'm sure no one here has ever done, or survey fatigue, the problem is that when you're assessing authentic human behaviour, because of the Hawthorne effect, it becomes an impossibility. So we need to figure out how to measure authentic human behaviour. Now, I think when you go back to the questions that we were originally asking, the question now changes from how do you teach how do you teach in transformation to the individual, and how do you measure that? Now, the implications of these questions are actually much deeper than what you might think. We're at a time in history where all of our future leaders are digital natives. So the way that these leaders learn and interact with the world is completely different. Now, we are seeing a global disruption in the education industry as we speak because the way that we learn has changed. Now, one of the key contributors to this change has been the way that we are augmenting our human experience with technology. So I'm sure that it's probably safe to say that everybody in this room has a phone and a computer. So if you just stop and think for a second how your cognitive life has been impacted by the introduction of the autocorrect. So even how we do basic tasks like spelling has fundamentally changed. This is a global shift in how we actually operate as humans. So if we go back to our first question and we ask again, what is the future of human behaviour? You can kind of see by some of the questions that we've been asking now that there's probably a really good chance that the future of human behaviour is going to be personalised, it's going to be measured, and it's going to be augmented by technology. Now, as entrepreneurs, we have this opportunity to get in front of that future and try and build the right technologies to make a better future for everyone. But just like that, also organisations have an opportunity to get in front of that future by disrupting the way that they teach and build culture and embrace that technology so we can meet the future needs together. Now, as it so happens, building this technology is exactly what my company is on a mission to do. So the journey that I've just taken you on is a kind of summary version of the last few years of research and questions that my company Liminal and myself have been taking. And the great news is that we've developed a new type of teaching technique that creates immersive, emotionally vulnerable, which sounds fun, I'm sure, trigger events to create these transformations inside individuals. And then we've built alongside that an entirely new measurement technology that essentially takes a data photograph of someone's behaviour at any particular moment in time. Now, we use this data photo to then map, measure and assess authentic, spontaneous human behaviour. Now, you can kind of think of our measurement technology kind of like taking a data selfie and our teaching technique like a system to build personal mastery around your own behaviour. Now, what's really exciting about this is that even at this really early stage, we can already see that by using technology to augment our own understanding of emotional intelligence, we can learn, well, the potential is definitely there, to learn more about what it means to be human than ever before. Now, thank you for coming on this journey with me now. And now that you're all obviously fellow entrepreneurs, I'd like to leave you with just one last question to consider. What is the one consistent factor in every difficult leadership situation that you personally have ever experienced? Now, what if I was to tell you that the answer was you? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mel. Well, ladies and gents, we'll now go into our Q&A session for the panel. I will take the opportunity and the liberty to ask the first question from Slido today, as posed by Lieutenant Colonel Matt Illick and as voted by you as the most popular. I'd like to pose it to both Daniel and John. As a junior NCO, you are the closest leader to our soldiers. How do you deal with the repercussions of a poisonous or difficult leader and the effect that they have on the humans that you're responsible for?
Okay, so first of all, I'll just talk about building relationships. So we've just got to understand who that poisonous leader is first and where they are on the command chain. So that will help you make a better decision. And you'll need to have a relationship either with someone that knows them or has a better relationship than yourself if they're higher up, or if you have a relationship with them, then you can deal with it personally yourself. So they're my experiences. How it's poisoning the team. So that is controlling your emotions to ensure that the group can see you and how they're affecting you and you're keeping positive. So I remember on ACAP last year where I was a corporal on, one of our guys, he was just a new sapper, he'd been doing a task and he kept on getting pressure put down him from two of our leaders there. And so I took it upon myself to talk to him and just sort of break down what everyone was going through. So contextualise the situation for him. So everyone's under pressure, so he could understand everyone's emotions, that the leader's emotions that were coming down onto him. He could have a point of perspective of where they were coming from. So it made it easier for him. And then I went around as well and spoke to the leaders and then told him my perspective and contextualised the issue for them. And it was kind of like a mediating activity, which I feel there is a lot of mediation being a junior NCO that you have to do. So I've tried to form that relationship and then also contextualise the situations for the guys, control their emotions, put them into perspective, and then try to get them to meet as well. So that's sort of one of the techniques that I've used.
Well, that's a tough one for me. I know a number of times sort of over the years that has occurred, but then I look at the situation and go, well, who's got the problem? Have they got the problem? Have I got the problem? That's usually the first place that I look at. You look at myself and go, well, why is there a problem to start with? Or why is this a toxic person? From there, if it's a general consensus that person is, let's just say, a toxic person, I don't let that spread. I mean, it's really important to get on top of that. I know my soldiers, when you get into that, it's quite easy to go, well, just go along with the general flow or go, well, that person's an idiot, and buy into that. What that does is buying into that and promoting, I suppose, that negative atmosphere within an organisation is that it erodes trust, it erodes morale, all those things associated with that. So for me, how I deal with it is ensuring that everyone understands that there's a chain of command and there's a reason behind that. I look at it deeply in relation to what's going on in their lives for them to be like that as well. and manage the situation. That's usually what I've done previously with I suppose an issue in leadership in that regard.
Right, excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Coming in, another question from Slido, if I can. A close third, but it's been up there for a while now through that presentation. And I'll pose it to Gemma and Mel there if I can. Is it possible to have an individual with high EQ and a low IQ? And I suppose I'll add to that, if so, what are the implications of that?
Yes. So in my slides, in my training, I've got a picture of the Big Bang cast. And I go through and I say, who's got the highest IQ? Who's got the lowest EQ? And then, and I go along and say, who's got the lowest IQ and the highest EQ? And they identify Penny. Do you guys watch Big Bang? Then I go along and say, who makes the most money? Who's the happiest? Who's the most influential in the group? And we kind of tease apart the factors of emotional intelligence. And then I go, who's got really high emotional perception but really low emotional management strategies? And that'd be Leonard. So to answer your question, you can.
Thank you, Gemma.
Oh, I have. Yeah, I agree. And I think another really big factor on that question is that we are malleable. So you can also learn both sides of that coin.
Yeah, emotional intelligence is a skill that can be developed. It gets greater with time. Females have a slightly higher emotional intelligence than men, but that doesn't mean that men cannot get better at it at the same rate.
Excellent. Great, thank you. So that I'm not stealing all the time from Slido, I'd like to hand back over to you as the audience to pose a question if you have one. Yes, thank you.
Is this on? Yeah, I had one on there, but I'm actually going to change the question. And it's mostly based around yours, Melissa. With our love of these little devices and Slido and our completely isolated world that we now live in, even though we're the most connected we've ever been, is there, looking at Dan's case study of living in the middle of nowhere with power, obviously developed a high EQ because he had to talk to a lot of people. However, most of our people nowadays, we use campus and we use phones and we isolate ourselves in Facebook and Twitter. Does that mean that therefore our emotional intelligence is at risk of a lack of development?
Yeah, this is a big question, and there's lots of people talking about it. But we take a kind of flip perspective on the effect of technology and EQ, in that we think that there is negatives, and it's been quite widely proven that there's negatives, but we use those negatives as a benchmark to create the positives. So the things that are now common behaviour in the adaptivity towards technology can be then used to create authentic behaviour feedback loops because that behaviour is already in place. So we're kind of leveraging off the problem to create the new solution as opposed to trying to create a solution from a different mindset that wasn't there before. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not. I think it's a decision, right? And so making emotionally intelligent decisions, that falls into a part of that. So the better that you are at making better emotional intelligent decisions for yourself, the easier it is to separate from the things that become addictive in your life, whether it's your phone or anything else.
Can I add to that? I don't know if any of you have children, but do you see how connected they are and how much they're interacting with their peers constantly? Like if that is not doing something, I don't know, like even though it's through text or through Snapchat, they are still having to decipher emotional information. So it is different from what we did as kids, but they are definitely super connected and they are having emotionally intelligent interactions at a rapid rate.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's that whole thing about digital natives. We say these terms like digital natives and the future of tech and this sort of stuff, but what it actually means is that it is different and the way that they learn is different and the way that we need to adapt to that has to meet that need.
Right, excellent, thank you. Next question, please. Yes, Greg, thanks. Brett, microphone, thanks.
Thanks very much. Greg Colton from The Cove. I've quick question really for probably Melissa and Gemma. Do you think we're getting to a point in the future where we'll be able to actually screen for personal attributes. And then large organisations such as Army can start putting people into positions that they are fundamentally psychologically suitable for, rather than the generalist models we have at the moment.
Yes, like the short answer is yes. The longer view of that is it might not look like what you might think it will look like. So I think that instead of looking for specific skills or traits, it would be more like a combination of characteristics under certain environments. So you would be more looking at how does this person react under this type of environment, and how does that benchmark against the average reaction across people that we know inside Army under those types of circumstances. And then is that a malleable skill that we can teach, and do we have training in place to teach that, and those sorts of things. So the solution for that, or the way that you use that data, is not as simple as like an in and out decision. It's more like we now understand more so we can make better decisions in a different way.
Just to add to that, so I'm consulting to the AIS, and we're actually looking at a program, a digital twin, and part of that will be emotional intelligence testing, but also looking at all the biochemicals, the neuropeptides, all these different sorts of factors that go into how people react in certain situations. I certainly wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't hire or fire someone on it. We're really not there yet, but I think in the future it will happen. And we're also looking at augmented reality and stress inoculation, so putting people into situations and seeing how they react under stress. But we're a long way off having anything concrete that we can use, and I think it'd be dangerous to do that at the moment, because people are adaptive learners. That experience will change them, and so subsequently they'll act differently to when they did if they never had that situation. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you. Yes, one over here. Thanks, Duncan.
Duncan George. Just following on sort of from that last question, a slightly maybe a reverse view on this one is that, Melissa, for you mainly, you talked a lot about your evolving technologies around self-control, self-regulation, self-mastery. Some of the best guys and girls I've ever worked for have been deeply flawed. They've had some real bad points, but they've been outweighed by their really good points. Is there a risk by sort of sanitising and focusing on emotionality, if that's even a word, as a science, that we're actually snuffing out some of those characteristics which, whilst negative in some senses, can be really positive in other ways?
What the technology teaches is not to remove the skill, but to understand yourself. Right? So understanding doesn't change you, it gives you the option to choose change. Right? So the more that you understand doesn't mean you're the less that you are. It just means that you have the ability to know when to apply that aspect of yourself and in what situation it's relevant to do so, because you understand it and you understand its consequences. So it's less of a risk of that. It's more of an opportunity that someone will actually know how to be their full self in all the different facets and situations and environments that they're put into. Because probably the opposite would probably be more likely to happen, that someone would be more likely to be enabled to be a closer version to their true self in all situations because they understand themselves enough to navigate that properly.
Just to add that, I don't think it's a sum zero proposition that if you take away that, you'll take away that. Like, we're much more complex than that. We can fix a probably disadvantageous emotion but still maintain it if you teach emotional and cognitive flexibility, and that's one of the things we try and teach. That it just doesn't have to be that simplistic.
All right, thank you. Next question, please. Yes, at the back.
Hey, Gemma and Mel, Sean Parks. Quick question on, obviously, the outcome I guess from this is Army's mission is all about generating performance. So in terms of exemplars of organisations using technology to drive behavioural change, would you be able to identify any and talk to how they're doing it?
Yeah, sure. A really good example that some might have already read about is what Ray Dalio has done in Bridgewater Associates. So Bridgewater Associates is probably the most successful hedge fund in the world. Really high-performing team, really big decision criteria is obviously when they make a decision and they lose billions of dollars, so it's not a good thing. So they implemented a technology system called Radical Transparency, which gave every single person in the organisation the right to openly comment about any other person in the organisation at any time, live, in real time, in meetings, to each other, from the chairman of the board all the way through to the receptionist. Everybody can comment on anyone in any situation. And the outcome of that has been absolutely extraordinary. It's probably quite a big case study to read, but it's well worth having a Google and having a look at his TED Talk and also reading the case study that Harvard did on it. It's an extraordinary example of how something that you would think is very counterintuitive, like radical transparency in a hedge fund, has turned out to be, has fundamentally shifted their ability to make correct decisions. So.
I also answer that. Sean, your own organisation, the guys up at, from SOTEC, with the WHOOP devices. So this is a fantastic behaviour modification device. This is like a non-invasive measure of stress and strain and recovery. So I've seen enormous behavioural changes in the guys at 2 Commando and SOTEC who wear these devices. You know, they change the way they sleep, they change the way they drink alcohol, they exercise, they recover, eat, and that has consequences for their emotions and then therefore their relationships and performance in the job. So yeah, I think, yeah, you guys are doing a fantastic job, SOTEC and 2 Commando.
Thank you very much. We have time for one final question, ladies and gents, from the floor, if you have one. Yes, please. Very good. I did give you one question today, Brett.
This is a question for the good corporals and Gemma. What are some traits or behaviours or characteristics in people that might generally be considered deep negatives that you've found are actually strong positives? So an example might be looking at, I've forgotten his name, Dan's upbringing. A lot of people might consider that strongly negative, but obviously that has translated to deep positives within his military work. So yeah, the question is social negatives that are actually military positives.
You know what? It depends on the person, mate. Like seriously, we are so different, all of us, and depends on what circumstances you find yourself in and what pressures you are. You could put someone in the same situation, they could react differently every single time. It depends what their state of mind is at that point in time. I think we talk about emotional intelligence today. I think that's the importance of understanding that people will do odd things sometimes under pressure and go in a completely different direction that you thought. It's about managing that at that point in time and understanding that everyone is different and accepting that and then trying to get the best out of them if they go completely off track with potentially a mission or something like that. I know that's not what you're after, but for me, as a kid, I suppose one would say that, yes, because I've got red hair. No, I'm not kidding. But you know, that resilience as a kid, right? It's going without things. It's achieving things with having limited resources. Without a doubt, it has affected me as a person. One would say from the combat side of things as well, look, I do react differently to other people in combat. That's been proven many times, just ask some of my mates of what I get up to. But I think it just depends on the individual, mate. It's a tough one.
I think, you know, dogged persistence, uncompromising standards that I've seen in the military is what makes you guys really effective. Maybe not so good as a parent. When your kid won't clean its room and then you just get really, really hardline on them. And, you know, there's been a lot of research around how army rat kids, you know, suffer a little bit. So, yeah, it's highly contextual, I think. Do you guys want to add to this?
Ladies and gents, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, question-wise. Please join me in thanking our panel and the time they've given us today.